There's no other plant apart from the tropical epiphytic orchids that have such a wide range of completely different fragrance types as the rose. And so you've got the 5 basic sorts. You've got old rose, myrrh, tea, fruity, and musk. And the musk fragrance is the one you get in the ramblers, and it comes from the stamens of the flowers as opposed to the petals and the other groups. All that stuff about outward pointing buds and preens at angle and sort of like quarter of an inch above the bud, all load of slush one can forget all about that. Just chop it down to about halfway, and that's as complicated as it needs to be, really.
Hello and welcome to episode 51 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking cool as a cucumber on a rather hot summer's day, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
Well, I have to say this, it is a relief coming inside, but over in Cambridgeshire, I think in that direction. If not, it's in that direction. We have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredriksson. At your service, my darling. Lovely to see you again. It seems ages since we've done this because you've been gallivanting. I mean, you've been to the other end of the country, or the bottom end of the country. And you must have an awful lot of things to tell us about what you've seen, like planty stuff.
Well, I have all kinds of things, including I seem to have gained a stick insect. What? Well, I came back from Somerset and Devon where we did our holidays. Anyone who follows me on Instagram and Twitter at ThunderFairy may have seen a video of a bright green thing running up my arm. I asked the internet, what is this? Because I think it must have come in the plants from the south of the country. And it turns out there are kind of naturalized, escaped stick insects in Cornwall and Devon and Somerset. And I think I must have brought one back. So the past days since I returned from holiday have been all about trying to investigate stick insect care and create my little insectarium, terrarium type habitat. Bramble, apparently, that turned out that's what they eat. And he's called Bert so far. So that's the latest exciting thing in my life, aside from all the planty discoveries on my holiday. We're also, I think, a little bit giddy today because we've got Ian Roofe back.
Hello,
Joy.
team. Hello. How are we?
Good, Ian. Nice to see you.
And you, dear boy, and you. Nice to be back. Thanks for having me, you two. It's really nice.
Well, Ian and Alan obviously work together very closely at East Ruston. We've all been friends for ages, and Ian is one of our original Get Gardening co-conspirators, but you are so busy and hard to pin down for a podcast. So we're just ecstatic that we've managed to get you for an hour of planty chat. I know you've got lots of show and tell as well.
Yep, I've got lots of plants. So I thought we could talk lots about plants. And then, you know what happens when we get together? We just generally sort of, other things come to mind, don't they? We talk about other things. But I do think we should hear about your planty things you got on your journey at some point as well, because that sounds intriguing.
Well, very quickly, because they're never as exciting as everybody else's. But I did a wonderful trip to a kind of a great gardener of the south of the country, Dean Croucher. We've mentioned him on this podcast before. I know Ben Preston of York Gate avidly follows his Instagram posts. And it just turned out I ended up round the corner from his garden. So hello, Dean. Thank you very much for giving me a personal tour and some very lovely pelargoniums as well, which might be where the stick insect came from. Who knows? I also managed to pick up a free plant left outside someone's house. You know, great gardeners who then say free to a good home and just leave a collection of things outside their gate. And there was a pot that had self-seeded quaking grass in it and a self-seeded Alchemilla mollis and a little tree. So I carried it for about a mile back from an Exmoor walk so that I could put it in the car and bring it home. So that's a small snapshot of my horticultural holidays. And haven't you been to Scotland, Ian? Haven't you been having exciting adventures as well?
Oh, a while ago, yeah. Went to Scotland for a week, which was lovely, and went round Edinburgh Botanics, which was great. And yeah, that was beautiful. I could have spent so much more time there because I absolutely love that garden. I mean, and the glass houses alone are lovely. And one of the highlights for that for me, although Alan does grow these in a shady part of East Ruston, was seeing huge drifts of Himalayan blue poppies, which of course Al will agree. I mean, they love that Scottish climate. They love that coolth, as he always says, that sort of cool, moist air. They love that sort of rich, leaf mouldy, peaty soil. And just, I mean, there's some growing in the North Garden, a little bit of the North Garden of Alan's, and they've been doing well for the last few years, really, haven't they? Considering old dry East Anglia, Al.
Well, considering they're in the wrong place in the wrong part of the country, I think we have to be very grateful that they do anything at all. But gardeners are like everybody else. We're all perverse. I mean, I had a friend in Scotland who was on the western coast of Scotland, where it's very, very wet. It's quite mild, but very, very wet. And he always wanted to grow cistus and helianthemums and things like that. And of course, I mean, you're fighting a losing battle, really, because it's just too wet for them. And in the same way, I want to grow the Himalayan blue poppy. So, just a little bit of success is good, I think.
But it was nice to see them in drift. It was really nice to see them sort of in drift through the woodland. So that was a nice little trip. But apart from that, just been busy working. The gardens are manic at the moment, and you will know from your own gardens that not only are the plants growing 10 feet, the weeds are having a damn good go at keeping up with them as well. It's a vintage year for weeds, and it's not a bad thing, but I do think this sort of vintage year is going to become a regular thing, because I think with all the rewilding that people are doing, with verges, with less things being used to cleanse the countryside, I think we're going to have a lot more of this in gardens, a lot more of the weeds, a lot more weed seed, a lot more of nature reclaiming the cultivated plants that we grow. And it's no bad thing, in my opinion, but sometimes, it's a little bit much, and Mother Nature really needs to rein her neck in a little bit.
I'm sure she's willing, now that you've spoken.
It was funny coming back from my holiday. 2 weeks of, I think, a real mixture of warm temperatures and rain meant that everything had exploded, and it was exciting to run round and see what had grown, what had fallen over. There was a bit of that. What was in flower. My Nicotiana Tinkerbell, which I've been waiting on, the one that evaded the mollusks, that flowered. I cannot kind of endorse that plant enough. It's absolutely beautiful. And I've got another sowing of those coming on. But I mean, talking of a vintage year, the mollusks for me have been a nightmare. I don't know about in your garden, Ian. I think you feel them a lot in a smaller garden. I know that obviously they're a problem everywhere, but when you've only got a limited space, they can just decimate things.
Yeah, they can. I've been quite lucky, really, because I've got a lot of bird feeders up, and I've got these little metal saucers, quite, well, say little, they're about sort of 18 inches across. I've got 3 of them tucked in the borders for all the birds to bath in. They're just at ground level. And actually, I think that what's happening is the blackbirds and the thrushes and lots of other things are actually keeping the mollusks down. I've been really lucky, but these sort of saucers just sitting in the border. I came home earlier, and one of the blackbirds had been having a bath in there and stuff. And I think that encourages them to feed in the undergrowth. I've got a lot of plants in the garden. It's only small, but it's full. But one thing that's done really well this year for me, and done too well and needed staking, was Althaea cannabina, and it's not flowering yet, or I'd have brought it in, but it will when it starts flowering. It's going to be flowering at 9 feet, and I've never had it that big. I mean, it's quite a wavy herbaceous plant that gets tall, but it's needed a lot of staking this year, and flowering at 9 feet is unheard of. It's phenomenal for that plant. It's really been very exuberant with its growth this year. It really has.
Yeah, lots of exuberant plants. I mean, I had a lovely walk around East Ruston Old Vicarage, and I think exuberant would be the word at the moment, Al.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we can't, as Ian said, everything is exuberant. It's not just the plant, it's the weeds as well. But I'll give you a couple of examples, because I think a couple of years ago, I went to Crigg Farm. Well, we did it through email, and I bought from them one of the tree dahlias that is supposed to flower in this country. So it needs a shorter season of growth before it actually flowers. And we left the tubers in. I mean, and there's one in the front of the house with its back against a warm wall. It's 12 feet tall already. I mean, that is amazing. The ones in the border are probably only 6 or 6. Are they about 6 feet, 7 feet tall?
Yeah, about 6 feet already. Yeah.
Yeah. But the one against the wall, you see, he's got all the exuberance of the climate that we've had. There's, all this lovely moisture and humidity and everything else, but it also got his back to a lovely warm wall. So he's shot up the leg. Or my grandfather used to say, that boy's shot up the leg, means he's grown tall.
Is it Dahlia excelsa, that one, isn't it, that you got because it starts flowering earlier than imperialis, and you're guaranteed a better show before the cold weather hits, aren't you?
Yes.
And
I mean,
that should be lovely.
The flowers are not that exciting. They're single and they're mauve, and they're typical sort of single species dahlia type flowers. But just to have them in flower on a plant that size, that's what the excitement is, I think.
Yeah, it's a lovely thing, and it's done really well in the autumn bowl. But where the autumn borders at yours, it's come back really well with a yew hedge behind it. And I think we did lift a few and pot them just as an insurance policy, but the rest have done phenomenally well, and they're going to look spectacular later this year. They really are.
I was mucking around the greenhouse and I discovered something else I bought last year, which is Dahlia imperialis crossed with Dahlia campanulata. And Dahlia campanulata is another tree dahlia, but it has hanging heads of bell-like flowers, and they're white with a maroon center, purpley maroon center. They really are lovely. But I mean, whether we'll ever get that to flower outside in the garden, I don't know. My plants, I have to say, are a little bit neglected because they were under some other plants that were growing away, and they've got to etiolated. But next year, I've resolved to take better care of them, and hopefully they will they will look in better condition.
I think you could have 10 more glass houses, Alan. We'd still manage to fill them.
I think we would.
It's always the most exciting thing. I love going through the sort of no entry signs and having a little fertile, as you would say, Alan, in the glass houses. There's always a treasure or 10 to be found in there. Talking of finding treasures, though, Ian, I saw the briefest flash of a bucket of treasures pass by the camera as we were preparing for this podcast.
Yeah, I've been and got a bucket full of bits and pieces.
We love show and tell. Go on then, talk us through what's been catching your eye.
Well, the first thing I want to start off is with this shrub, which I'm pretty sure Alan must have somewhere. It's a Sorbaria, and can you see that foliage? It's got the most wonderful corrugations on it. It's a Sorbaria called kirilowii arborea, and it's flowering at mum and dad's at the moment. And I got it, must be about 10 years ago, from a flower show at Hyde Hall. I was down there with our friend Lionel, who you all know, and I bought this small plant for about sort of 2 feet, and it's now flowering at about 12 feet, and it's about 12 feet high and about 6 feet across. It's quite tight at the base, but it opens out, and it's got these huge multiple panicles of white flowers that smell a bit like hawthorn, but they look a bit like a large aruncus or a larger stilby. And I suppose I bought it for its foliage primarily, but the flowers are lovely. And I've been listening to a lot of Christopher Lloyd recently. I've been listening to a lot of his books on audiobook while I've been working, and it's made me rethink a lot of plants, which I suppose as fashion-wise as gardeners, we've become a bit snobbish about and things. And he was talking about cortaderia this afternoon when I was listening, and I thought, well, actually, we've become quite snobbish about cortaderia, but that's just because we normally associate them with sort of front lawns in suburbia. But actually, as an interesting mixed scheme, as a mixed border, I thought, maybe put with Cotinus coggygria or Catalpa bignonioides or something, they would look fantastic. And this is a plant, I suppose, that some people may be quite snobbish about at the moment, but it's absolutely lovely. It's covered in pollen beetles, it's covered in insects, and the foliage is great. It's deciduous, it's easy to look after. I don't know if Al has got it, but I'm going to try this autumn to take some chunks off the bottom and pot them for him if he hasn't, because I think this would be a lovely addition.
That one. I've got a much dwarfer Sorbaria, which, I mean, when you held it up, I thought, well, mine doesn't look like that before you started talking about it.
No, look at that leaf look. It's just something about it.
Yeah, it hasn't got that corrugation on the foliage. So mine looks like a poor relation to that, but that is lovely.
I mean, it might be a nice addition, maybe, I don't know, to one of the woodland areas. It grows in full sun at the moment, or it might be something to add to your exotic garden, I don't know. But it's just a cloud of white at the moment, and it's fantastic. And,
I can see that in the exotic garden, in actual fact. If it's got a tight bottom and it goes out like a vase shape, it's going to be ideal for planting up close to, isn't it?
I think that's quite good, isn't it? Because you can actually get things. You could get dahlias around there. You could get cannas. You could get any of those large foliage plants. And I think what's quite lovely about your exotic garden, I know that you used to plant a lot of annuals and things in there, but I know over the time you've been quite good and sort of have increased your palette of more sort of shield stuff. And then we splatter in a lot of wonderful tender exotics that you've grown. And I think that's quite a nice way it's evolved over the years. I know it's not quite so exuberant for the intense colour that you want, but for the season it gives now and for the structure and the form and the colour of foliage, I think it's really, really interesting still, even though it's evolved constantly over the years,
Well, I remember talking to somebody in the garden some time ago, years ago, and when the exotic garden was probably more about colour than it was about shape and form. And she actually said to me, that the word exotic to me conjures up big leaves, big foliage. And I suddenly thought, yes, that's probably quite right, really. Because otherwise it can look like a hothouse that's had the roof taken off, if you see what I mean.
It feels very jungly in your exotic garden now. It's got a real sort of, you know,
I mean,
real
we've got a
jungly
bamboo
feel.
in there. That, I mean, I know this. It's a nuisance. It's a nuisance bamboo because it does run a bit. But I mean, it shoots up to 20 feet tall. Individual canes go to 20 feet tall. And I mean, I think that is something that's how I want to go. And that's why we've got Tetrapanax papyrifera rex, or T. rex as it's more colloquially known. Because, you know, at the moment, that is the biggest leaf we can grow outside in England. But I say at the moment, because who knows? We've got that lovely large leaf magnolia in there as well.
Oh, is it Dahlia?
Dahlia, yeah, it has those.
Yeah.
I suppose it looks like the flowers are the colour of a cold cup of milky coffee.
Yeah, but it's beautiful. I mean, that's it's beautiful.
But I mean, it's the leaves that we're growing it for, really. That's what we like.
It's got fat buds on it at the moment, like goose eggs. I mean, they're really big buds on it at the moment. They really are. And you've got things like pollarded tree of heaven in there, Ailanthus altissima. And we moved some dead men's fingers that were in the autumn borders, and they were too big by an opening that Alan and Graham put in. And I think I was told to get rid of them, but I think they may have accidentally made their way into the back of the exotic border, because I thought this wonderful finely cut leaf, and then imagine these flowers, these yellow flowers, then in the autumn you have these dark sort of turquoise broad beans hanging on them. How cool that would look. So I mean, if they survive another year and I get told to get rid of them again, they'll have to go, but they look really good at the moment with like Empress Wu, this hosta which is huge, and they've got red Ensete bananas that we've sort of peppered through there with them. So, you know, Al provides all the wonderful plants and the inspiration, and we just sort of get it all in it. So it's a lovely mix, it really is.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that it is the way you plant it in as well. I mean, I can provide the plants and I can suggest things, but it's also the way that you plant them. I mean, I'd like to say that you don't give yourself enough credit for some of the effects that you create, because they are delightful. And I want so that people hear me say it.
Well, it's very, very lovely. I mean, I've always loved exotics. I used to work at an exotic garden in Norwich when I first left school part-time, and that really inspired me. And then coming to work at Alan's, an exotic garden like that, it's really lovely. I've always had a love for those jungle and those exotic plants. It's like anything. It's the same again as Alan said. We're gardeners that we just want to grow stuff that we shouldn't be able to grow. And I think that's what it's all about, really, these sort of lush foliage things.
It's kind of pushing the boundaries all the time, isn't it? And trying to expand the palette of what we actually grow. And sometimes, I mean, plants will be hardy. I mean, for instance, a common or garden house plant, Streptocarpus, I put some out in the garden. They're not there now because last winter they did die because it was quite a long period of cold last winter. But they lasted 3 or 4 years in the garden. They didn't start flowering until probably middle of July. But that's not unusual anyway. But I mean, it was quite unusual to see Streptocarpus being used as a hardy plant.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, it had been unheard of that you could even get Streptocarpus through a winter outside. So the fact they got through the winter, I think it's because you had them in that border underneath that big, was it Wellingtonia that's there? And I think some of the dryness helped, I think. A lot of it is these plants will take intense cold, but they won't take intense cold and wet. That's a lethal combination for them. But give them a dry canopy, and that really, really helps a lot of things. It really does. Another plant I think people probably are quite funny about are the Phygelius. Now, Alan grows quite a few Phygelius, and some of them grow 8 or 10 feet up on south-facing walls. And this is Phygelius rectus, African queen, which I've always loved them. I first saw them as basket and sort of container plants when I used to work at the nursery years ago, but I've had these in a south-facing little border at mine. It's only a foot wide, which is really, really narrow, and it's raised with gravel boards and timber, but it's about sort of 5 feet up the fence now, and it's absolutely lovely. Sometimes called, I think, is it the Cape Fuchsia or the Cape Figwort? Yeah. Am I right? It's got those two sort of names, hasn't it? Yeah. So a South African sort of subby shrub thing. It can sometimes get these sort of little slugs, which can sometimes, slugworms that can sometimes strip the foliage, but mine stay quite keen. These lovely little trumpets, very narrow, but inside is a lovely yellow, and then as the bottom of the petals reflex back, they're bright red, but the actual overall trumpet is a lovely pink. So they're a great thing, and all I do is trim them back to the fence, sort of late winter, early spring, and I'm rewarded with these lovely, once again, panicles of great pink flowers. There's good yellow ones, isn't there, as well, Al? Good yellow forms?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's also now a kind of purpley magenta one that's been bred for basket plants, I think. But you say you first saw them as basket plants. I think that's quite interesting because that shows the difference between me and you, because I remember seeing that grown in a border at Sheringham Hall when I was about 20.
Oh, wow.
Which would have been, I mean, completely unusual. And maybe it was bedded out for the summer, I don't know. Or maybe they got away with it on the coast at Sheringham. But because the house at Sheringham Hall is actually, when the Upchurch had it built, who's the man that did the Red Book? Humphrey Repton.
Repton, yeah.
Yeah, they wanted the house to have sea views, and Repton said, no, you don't. You want the house behind the hill to have inland views, which faces west, because that North Sea coast is a very hostile environment. And he was quite right, of course. So you turn your house around, and if you want to look out to sea, well, you can go walk around the corner and do that. But to have the maximum shelter for your garden, you need it to be facing west. So that's where I first saw that. But I mean, Phygelius, yeah.
It's a lovely thing. I know you grow a lot of these things.
It runs a little bit under the soil too, Ian, doesn't it?
Yeah, it can produce sort of, these little sort of stoloniferous roots, and you get a plant cut a few feet away. But it is lovely. You just chop them off and pot them, and you've got fresh plants again, which is nice.
Exactly.
I'm hoping this is a plant that really isn't that unusual to a lot of gardeners, because I think every garden should probably have a catalpa in. And this is a catalpa, it's an Indian bean tree, and it's a Catalpa aurea. And it's one that's growing in my folks' garden that I planted, must be 20 years ago, and a little bit by their conservatory, which is this little exotic border that I did many, many years ago. And it's a lovely thing. And there's a good range of catalpas to grow, but I think this is by far one of the best. And there's a couple of ways of growing it. You can leave it to get into quite a large tree, and it will reach probably 30 plus feet in height and spread. And if we get a good summer, it will have those wonderful upright panicles of white flowers, cross between sort of slightly horse chestnutty, but they're also slightly foxglove tree, aren't they, almost? Yeah. And then when they fruit, you get these long, thin bean-like pods to it as well. But the other way to grow, if you haven't got lots of space, is to pollard it. And pollarding is where you've got a good trunk on the tree, and you take back all that all the previous year's growth back in the spring to probably about 3 or 4 shoots to about sort of 4 to 5 inches of stem. Then you get this eruption of sap that rises up the trunk, and it forces all these shoots to come out really quickly, and you get these quite large leaves on it as well. And the colour is just beautiful. That lovely acidy yellow is just great. And the new foliage, you can see the new shoots have got a slightly sort of reddish bronze tinge to them. And I was only thinking, I think it was a day or yesterday, I was thinking about this Catalpa aurea and thinking, would it be lovely to either plant an avenue of it or to have it running peppered through a long border or something. And then just before we started, Alan, we said, what have we been doing? And Alan went, oh, go on, Al, you say. I've been thinking about things to do with golden catalpas.
Well, Graham and I were walking out into the tea garden to have a cup of tea or cup of coffee this morning. And there is a golden catalpa there. It just grows as a freestanding tree. And I mean, on a bright sunny day against the brilliant blue sky, the leaves on this tree are singing. They're absolutely beautiful. This acidy yellow color is an interesting color, I think, because it's the kind of color that leavens everything. It's almost, I always say it about lime green. I mean, Alchemilla mollis is a great leavener. The green tobacco plant is a great leavener. Euphorbias are great leaveners. All those things with all the plants that give us that acid green coloring. I mean, Primula Francisca is another one. They all have that thing of, they bring colors that clash together somehow or other. I don't know how it works. There's probably an explanation for this, and I'm bumbling away like a mad thing. But we just looked at this catalpa this morning, Graham and I, and we said, there's something about that tree. We ought to do something with catalpas. And I was telling Ian, and Ian said, well, I don't believe this. I was thinking about this yesterday.
I'm going to edit this at the end of the video so people can see the wonderful joy of the reaction between you two at realizing you basically had simultaneous inspiration in exactly the same direction. It's wonderful.
Well, I think what Alan says about it is completely true, because I was thinking you could combine this with really rich purples, oranges and reds for a really sort of hot, fiery, exotic mix. But at the same time, you could put whites, pale purples, mauves and blues with it, and it would all be very cool and actually quite relaxing. And that's what's great about these limes, is depending on what you put with them, they react accordingly. And it's just such a great plant for that. And I mean, that zesty lime is just fantastic, fully hardy, easy to grow, and at home in an exotic garden, or as a plant at the back of a nice mixed shrubbery. You could even put lovely Cotinus, I said it, but Cotinus coggygria with that rich burgundy and purple would work really well with it as well. I think, but I think also contrasting flower structures. So you could put some ornamental grasses with it as well, something like cabaret or cosmopolitan. It's just such a universal foliage to use, isn't it, Anne? It really is.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's one of the things that perhaps people could do more of if they're planning a border. I mean, I think if you look at the way some people design borders today, and let's take Tom Stuart Smith for instance, because he's probably the foremost garden designer in England at the moment, doing some wonderful, wonderful work. One of his signature stamps, if you like, is to grow rectangular cut, either beech or hornbeam columns throughout borders as accents. Well, if you don't want to do all that, I mean, you could use the Catalpa bignonioides aurea, which has big leaves, but there are other plants that you could do this with. Plants like the foxglove tree, Paulownia tomentosa. You see, if you pollard that down to and leave 1 or 2 or even 3 shoots, you could leave 4 or 5. You'll get leaves that are much, much bigger than if the tree had not been cut. Ailanthus altissima, the tree of heaven, you can do the same with that. That's not quite such a willing tree to pollard, but it will do it, and you can do it, and you can make it do that. And then, of course, there is the Catalpa that we've got at the end of the Thalictrum garden, which is a kind of a complete mishmash, if you like. It's Catalpa bignonioides, and at the top of the stem has been grafted Catalpa bignonioides nana. So we've got a baby on top of the biggin. And that enforces the head, the crown, to make a very dense head of much smaller leaves. And I'm just wondering, I don't know whether there's a Catalpa bignonioides nana aurea. Have you ever heard of it, Ian?
No, I haven't. I've never seen that.
It was, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's another one that I've got, which is the purple-leafed form of Catalpa as well. Catalpa erubescens, I think, or yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Which is lovely. And talking about pollarding, we also do it in a number of gardens with Acer platanoides crimson king. Now that's a tree which, if you let it grow, will get 40 feet high and 40 feet across easily, plus more. But actually, in a couple of clients' gardens, we use it at the back of the borders, and we pollard it back every second year to a tight crown, and it puts on about sort of 4 foot wands of growth, and it's lovely. And we also do it with Drummondii as well. Now, Drummondii is an Acer platanoides Drummondii. It's notorious for reverting and sporting green shoots, but if you keep it as a manageable pollard and pollard it back every few years, in the spring, if you canny with your eye, you can see the green shoots that come through. You just snap them out in the spring, so as the variegation takes over. Now, they're trees that I wouldn't dream of planting unless I had rolling acres possibly, but as pollards, they look fantastic. And repeating that colour through a border and that structure is a brilliant thing to do. And my thing is that give it a go. And if it looks like it might be pollarded, just do it. But often it's a great way of rescuing trees in particular that have got out of hand. Pollard them back, and they can really be brought back into great shapes again.
You mentioned you were listening to Christopher Lloyd on audiobooks, and one of the things that I remember him doing is there's a purple leaf form of poplar, which he used to pollard back every year, and perhaps I think in the long border. And the other thing was a very vigorous, variegated maple, and I can't remember which one it was, but he used to hack that back every year as well.
Think that was Drummondii, because that's variegated Drummondii.
No, I don't. I think it was more feathery than Drummondii, actually. Ian.
Well, it might have been one of the boxwood. There's a whole group of the boxwood acers.
I can't remember which one it is, but you haven't heard that yet.
No, I haven't heard that yet. No, I'm only on the Well-Tempered Garden at the moment. I've got a few more to go through yet, but it's lovely to hear. It's not him narrating, of course, but it's just lovely to hear him talking about plants. I've had his books for a while and I've dipped in and out with them, but I always seem to take things in better from an auditory point of view. And when I'm working, it's lovely to be able to listen to all these things and take it on as well. But it might be the boxwood acers, Acer negundo, because they pollard really well. And there's some golden forms of those I've seen. There's one called flamingo as well, which is variegated, and the new shoots come out as sort of slightly soft pink, but they can get quite big trees. But pollard them back, and you get these wonderful new strong growth and quite tight crowns. They're lovely. So it's definitely things to consider.
Do you know the tree called Cotinus sinensis?
I do. And I've seen a huge one of those growing up by your pavilion at East Ruston, but I'm pretty sure that can be done as well, can't it?
I wonder if that, well, I think that would probably pollard as well.
Imagine the new growth, because the new growth on that is shocking pink, isn't it? So Imagine if you kept that crown, it would look absolutely beautiful. definitely worth a try. I mean, it's a whole way forward with things. And I think this is the way as well, with gardens being small, people are so scared to plant trees. They just don't want to do it. But that's a great way of getting trees that you like kept into a manageable space. So
and for people who have got a small garden and want to get inspired with kind of the bigger plants and the bigger leaf plants they could grow and how they might be able to treat them, Dan Cooper, the Frustrated Gardener, who will link to episode 42 of this podcast, was great. Lots of tulip chat there. But I know if you follow his Instagram, his blog, his Twitter, he has recently been pollarding his catalpa, and that's very much his style of planting. So if you want to go down that route and you want to follow someone who's doing something similar, he's a great shout for that. What have you got next, Mr. Roofe?
Common old feverfew, one of the Tanacetums, but it was looking so lovely out in some stock beds at mum and dad's, mixed in with underneath some berberis that was there as well, and with some salvia caradonna near it as well. And I thought how lovely it would just be to lace it through a border somewhere. It's a plant which we tend to overlook. It can sometimes be a weed for some people, but just that sort of lace through a border, I think it would give it a wonderful froth.
You mean the way we've used Erigeron annuus?
Well, you did in that colour scheme by the teak house. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It really does.
That is absolutely gorgeous because it's like a sprinkling of sort of fairy dust through the border. And I mean, it just livens everything up. I'm going to grow more and more of that, and I'm sure.
I find that very exciting as a plant. Having never known about it, it's just this wonderful. Well, fog's not, but it's this wonderful haze, this mist, this froth that just works its way through. And then you'd put in that, what was that lovely pink called squirrel tails or pink squirrel?
Oh, sanguisorba.
Sanguisorba.
Lilac squirrel.
God, it was just love. There was a garden. There was a big house up in the west of Norfolk. It does wedding. Is it Narborough Hall?
Yes.
And I remember going to Narborough Hall about 10 years ago and not seeing that, but their borders had this wonderful sort of romantic froth all the way through them, And I think that's a really difficult thing to do, actually, because if you let nature do too much, it becomes weedy. And to have the time to edit out all the things you don't want, and that planting, I know you weren't inspired by that, but it just reminded me of that wonderful sort of romantic froth of...
Yeah.
Oh, God, right.
It's so hard to do that.
Well, it just brought everything together. It started off, there's going to be a fight in there, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because there are 5 clumps of a Montbretia or a Crocosmia in there, and I know that it's completely the wrong colour, and I'm going to have to cut the flowers off, but that doesn't matter. But my planting scheme was inspired by that pink hydrangea paniculata that's in there.
Oh, lovely!
I suddenly thought, oh, I've got a salvia called Penny's Pink that is very, very similar in colour to that, so we can put those two together. And then I had the salvia bullulata, which is got kind of bluey green flowers, almost turquoisey bluey green flowers, and a green zinnia. And then I found that I sent away some plugs of a very dwarf cosmos, which is kind of it's pink with touches of orange and purple in the petals. It's like a shimmer on it. It's very strange. And all those colours, they work together so well. But then the Erigeron annuus coming through it with a haze of white daisies just lifts everything.
Very beautiful.
And I think probably quite a good way that for gardeners and garden designers and people like that to think. You just suggested doing that kind of thing with Tanacetum, which I think is lovely. And maybe there are other plants that we could use to do that, do a similar sort of job. I mean, grow them. It's got to be something that's easily grown. It's got to be something that you can grow reasonably quickly in large numbers to be able to use generously. Because I think probably in that little bit of border, I've used maybe between 80 and 100 plants of Erigeron annuus from 9 centimetre pots.
I think probably as well, it's that Asteraceae group is probably the one to go for, isn't it? It's those daisies which add to that nice sort of frothy look as well, which is lovely.
Yeah, it is.
So what do you have next?
So a few more bits to talk about. I put these two together because they look quite nice together. But I've got out the front in my little border at the front of the house, I've got Helichrysum metallicum, the curry plant, and I got it for the foliage really. But the flowers on it at the moment, it's the first year it's really flowered well, are absolutely lovely. This sort of sulphury, mustardy yellow, and I know a lot of people, and Christopher Lloyd would say, I don't know why you want to grow the flowers on that because it's awful, but it's looking beautiful at the moment. It really is. And the insects are loving it. It's great for the pollinators. Lovely silver foliage, really well behaved, drought tolerant. We'll take a good trim up late winter, early spring if you need it. The whole plant overall, including flowers, is about sort of 18 inches height and spread, but it's looking really, really lovely. I know that people sort of use these things all the time, but I've really seen this in a new light, and that's because it's growing with some Sweet William, some Dianthus barbatus, and I just thought how nice those two look together. I love Sweet Williams. I'm always growing Sweet Williams. I always get my dad to sow a load, and also, you know, wallflowers as well and things, but these Dianthus barbatus are lovely. And I thought that combination was pretty fantastic. And I also thought, I've got in the back garden growing Verbena officinalis Bampton. And I thought, oh, well, look at those three together. They look really quite nice, I think, with those wonderful sort of very delicate, soft, pale pink flowers and that wonderful, those sort of rich purple stems and purple foliage. So there are three plants, which I think I'm going to try them in some clients' gardens and try them as a mixture, because they all like the same sort of soil conditions. They like it free draining, they like it gritty, they like it very, very sunny. And there's a theme. What do you think, Al? There's a theme. I think that would work quite nicely.
I think the whole thing is just so refreshing, because you've taken three plants there that you wouldn't even consider putting together. And I mean, I just think they look fantastic together. I think it's a spark. It's an original way of using those plants, and I just find it very exciting. I think the look could be lovely.
So I don't know if I'm going to try it. I'm going to have to speak to a friend that's got a large garden and see if I could try it in one of his beds somewhere. I'll see how that goes. But I was thinking, as a scheme, it might be really quite interesting and a bit natty. And you could even then possibly weave some maybe some orange tulips through it for the spring to go with the sort of reddish foliage on not the flowers, but the reddish foliage that you get on the new growth on the Sweet Williams, and then that sort of purple foliage you get on the Verbena Bampton as well. So there's three things definitely worth trying. I've got a couple more sort of odd things. I know I've talked about this before, and I think I have talked about it before, but it's just such a brilliant border plant. It's Diascia personata. There's one called Hopley's form, but the reason I put this in is because I grow the pink form, but I know that Alan has sourced a wonderful, rich orange cultivar as well, haven't you? And I want you to tell us about that. Yeah, I want you to tell us about it, because if it's as good as this, it's going to be a great border plant.
Well, I think it probably might be as good as that, actually. But when we had our plant fair, Ed Brown came with a lovely selection of plants as usual, and he actually brought me some lovely name varieties of nerines, which was very kind of him. But he had two plants of this orange Diascia personata, which I'd read about but hadn't seen, and I just had to have them. And I hope that it's going to, I mean, it looks entirely like personata, but with orange flowers. So I hope that it's going to be as good. I've got one still in a pot. I'm going to pot it on and put it into a much bigger pot and use it as a stock plant to take lots of cuttings of, so we have more of it next year.
I mean, if the colour's great, and if it's got the long season of flowering that personata has, because this will start flowering, I mean, you know, late May, early June, and then June, July, August, September, October, if we get a mild autumn, that a huge season of flower. And it's just fantastic. Flowers about 3 to 4 feet on quite sort of, it's got these lovely square stems to it, very, very strong. And it has a great lot of sort of movement to it, but it's not dense at the bottom. It's quite sort of airy in its habit. It doesn't tend to sort of form a blob, does it? It tends to have quite a nice feel about it.
I've got it growing through rose bushes. So the idea is that it hides the ugly part of the roses. So it covers the bare legs and the stems that you don't really want to look at. It's a great weaver, Diascia personata.
Yeah, so one definitely. So it's just that as I've got the orange form, I was thinking if that's got any of the traits that this has, it'd be really good. I've got two more things. Is that all right? Just quickly. Spheralcia, lovely Spheralcia, and this is
one of these yesterday.
Sorry,
I think Thordis acquired one of these yesterday.
Go on, Thordis. What made you love it so much?
I was walking through Alan's greenhouse, and I said, oh, what is this? It's all the things I love. I mean, we all know every single podcast I talk about how much I love these sorts of tones, but its form, it's got a lovely sort of soft, almost like a grey hue to the foliage as well. It's just beautiful. And the foliage offsets those peachy apricot-y kind of little mallow flowers wonderfully.
I think this one is Childerley, isn't it, Al?
Yes.
And there's a slightly darker one, there's New Zealand coral, which is that sort of slightly rich, as the name suggests, corally colour. But it's got those sort of salmony, apricot-y flowers, aren't they? It's obviously part of the mallow one of the mallow relatives. But you're right, Thordis, it's just lovely, flowering at about 4 feet in my garden, and it's near Clematis durandii, which is a lovely sort of rich purpley mauve that I've got on the fence behind it, and it works really well. It's lovely there, so it's growing well. I think it's a great plant, the Soralsias, and once again, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we wouldn't have thought of having them as perennial plants, but since our climate's changed, they're really lovely. I'm glad you fell in love with this, because it's a cracker of a plant.
And while you're talking about clematis, the last time I was talking to you, just in real life, not on a podcast, we had a conversation around climbers, and I found it, as by far the newest gardener who's ever involved with this podcast, I thought it was really illuminating to hear how many climbers you would put in a space. And I thought it was very exciting. So could you possibly share some of your climbing wisdom?
Well, I can, but the reason I do like this is because for the last 12 years that I've been sort of working at Alan's, I've seen how he plants climbers, and I thought I'm going to go all out with this, and I thought plant like grey, because what you've got to think about is really that the border space that a climber takes up is really only probably a square foot maximum. Think about it, it's all it really needs for the crown, even maybe 6 or 8 inches. So I've got a section, I've got lots of fences around the garden, quite a small garden, but my main aim was to cover them in climbers. And on a 12-foot stretch of fence, I've got about 15 climbers sort of doing their thing, some which probably shouldn't be there. I've got this wonderful climber that I got from East Ruston Old Vicarage. It's called Cyanura aureophila, and it currently swamps a large holly on Alan's entrance path, and it's got large leaves, quite succulent, quite juicy, but it has flowers like a Hoya, as Alan will tell you, these wonderful sort of flowers like a Hoya, and the scent is absolutely wonderful. And I've got that on the fence. I've got 3 or 4 different clematis that are in there as well. I've got some lovely sort of small compact climbing roses that a friend Matt gave me, who works at Horning Hall. I've got abutilons, I've got Phygelius, I've got honeysuckles, I've got some sweet peas plugged in for the summer through there as well. I've got the golden leaf Trachlospermum called Golden Memories. I've got Clematis durandii. I've got a lot of things on there. So I thought, what would Alan do? And I thought, well, Alan would go big or go home and just plant it and fill it. And, in a small garden as well, if you can hide some of the boundaries, it's amazing how you forget how small your space is. So, I'm hoping it's going to continue to work well. I've got Clematis europhila on there as well for the winter. Stachyurus praecox in there as well. I've got Abeliophyllum disticum for the winter. I mean, I've probably planted far too much, but we're 2 years in now, and it's looking really well. Everything seems to be getting on really well. And I'm really pleased with it. It's a brilliant mix of interesting things, but it all stems from Alan, because I see how he plants stuff, and I thought, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to fill those fences up. I put extra posts in to strengthen it because the builders had put not enough posts in, so I put extra posts in because I knew the weight on there was going to be horrendous. And then I put vine eyes in with on the inside of the posts. I think I said to you before, I've tensioned them so I can actually almost play notes on the wires. They're so tight, they actually ring like guitar chords, and that's a secret to it as well, because climbers can get really heavy when they're established. But yeah, it's down to Alan's. It's thanks to you, dear chap, because I thought, well, just fill the fence up, fill it up, and just see what happens with it. And it's been a delight. It really has.
Well, thank you for that. But I was looking at, I think it was probably, it's either Instagram or Twitter the other day, and somebody had posted a picture of Lonicera hildebrandiana.
Yeah.
People that don't know it, it is the largest leaved honeysuckle that we can grow. And I think it probably comes from Burma. They're actually saying that Lonicera hildebrandiana is being grown outside at Wisley. Now, do you think, and this is one for Matt Pottage when I next talk to him, but do you think that this is bedded out, or do you think that they're risking it by wrapping it in the autumn and for the winter? Because Wisley is quite a cold garden, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be really cold. And I know parts of it, they garden on very heavy soil as well. But I know that particularly, Matthew Pottage, new young curator, I know he's been in the job for a while, but he's very keen on pushing those boundaries. And I wonder if, due to the fact they've got a really nice south-facing wall for it, maybe, and they've got maybe hard landscaping nearby, maybe large flagstones or brickweave, that's giving a lot of residual heat that might well be keeping it going. I know that Simon Gatchers used to grow it quite successfully in the Bishop's Garden in Norwich. and that's sort of got that urban warming. So if they can grow it, Al, I mean, you should give it a go, because you've got, wonderful baked walls, but does it grow outside?
I've got one, you see, and I'm wondering whether to risk it.
Do it.
It gazes reproachfully at me every time I pass it in the greenhouse, saying, what are you going to do with me, and when are you going to do it? Perhaps I've just discovered.
I think take some cuttings just as a little insurance policy, and then get it out on a warm wall. I mean, you could put it out on your wall by the library, maybe, because that's really hot, isn't it? But that's quite full. But you've got so many good south-facing walls, it would flourish.
I did wonder about the west-facing wall in the front courtyard behind the seat, because geranium. The reason I'm saying that is geranium madurense grows there, and that is quite a tender geranium. It's a hardy geranium, but it's quite tender for Norfolk. That's what I'm saying. And I just wondered if I might try it behind that seat, because there's paving there, there's the warm wall, there's the seat for extra protection as well.
Yeah, and you also grow Hardenbergia violacea in there, which really shouldn't really have the ability to grow outside through cold winters, really, but that flourishes in there.
True. Well,
so yeah, I think sounds wonderful. Sounds excellent idea.
It's exciting. I think your show and tell has one thing to offer up.
Well, just one last thing, which is for foliage, and I've got this because Christopher Lloyd was talking about it in his audio book today, and it's an Eleagnus, and it's Eleagnus angustifolia, and it's Angustifolia quicksilver, and it's probably one, I hope I've not mentioned it before, but it's just the most wonderful foliage plant. This doesn't quite do it justice here, but the most brilliant silver leaves, and it'll be bejeweled with tiny yellow flowers in the next sort of month or so, which will have the most wonderful rich fragrance to it. And it's a wonderful shrub, whereas some Eleagnus can be quite rigid. And in his book, he says, I don't know, he says his friend John Treasure says, I don't know why you bother growing this plant, Christopher. It has the growth habit of ingrown toenails, which it was just quite brilliant. And if you think about it, if you've ever pruned an Eleagnus, it's true, because all the branches get entangled and knotted. It doesn't really have a structure, but this is very different. It's very much more open, very much looser in its habit. And for a hot sunny border, for that silver foliage, sweetly scented blooms, it's a real cracker of a shrub. It really is. So definitely one that, if you are a bit snobbish about Eleagnus and want something that's going to reignite your passion into that plant, I think quicksilver is definitely one you should be looking at.
I think I can add a privet to that, with the courtesy of Christo as well, because there was a privet that he was growing many, many years ago. I'm going back 40 years now, and it was called kirilowii, and it has larger than normal panicles of typical privet blossom, rather like a cream. It looks like a cream lilac almost, but it's another one of those plants that people were snobby about because it's a privet. It's a ligustrum, and I don't want that because it's a privet. Like you say, I don't want that. It's an Eleagnus, but there's Eleagnus, there's Eleagnus, and there's ligustrums and ligustrums. And I think this is all very much interesting to me at the moment, because every time I'm moving around the garden into a different area and I see a plant that we're growing, I think, well, that's rather tired. I ought to take that out. What are you going to replace it with? And I think, well, is there a better form of this that I can grow? Are there better, more, I mean, it's like Philadelphus, Belle Étoile, a common old thing, really. It's been around for about 40, 50 years. But it's still one of the best. So I would always want to have that. It's, it's just searching for the best, but the slightly different as well, I think.
There's another great form of Philadelphus I grow called Starbright, which has the most wonderful rich purple calyx and then single white flowers again. And it's got quite a sort of dark purple in the throat as well, and I bought that about sort of 10 years ago, and that's lovely. It's got the most wonderful open habit as well, whereas some Philadelphus can always become quite staunched, quite sort of rigid. That once again has got quite a nice open habit to it. So that's Starbright, if anyone likes that. It's lovely.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's it really. So hopefully a few bits that are interesting bits. What I quite like is though that when you talk about plants with friends, any plants, like you guys are, we can just talk about them for ages, and things spring up, and it's something that Thordis you've bought, or it's something that Alan's read about, or he's been growing for 20 years, or it might be an odd thing you might think, oh, I've not had that for a while, I might buy it. And that's why I think plants are so fantastic, because they just sounds a bit corny, but they sort of link generations, don't they? We've all got a love for one thing, and that's just brilliant. So yeah.
And I just sit here thinking there are so many things I want to grow. I'm going to have to rip a couple of things out, I think, and replace them.
I don't think I'll ever grow what I want to in my lifetime enough of it. I've come to that conclusion that I'm just not going to be able to. You know, I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to indulge myself in, if I can't do it in my own garden, I'm going to add it to clients' gardens. Just, you know, there's just so much interesting things to grow, and new stuff always being discovered or bred or brought out, you know.
Yeah. You're always, and I don't know why I do this podcast, because it's bad enough reading books or listening to books and visiting gardens, and that's all enough without all of this. So if you are watching or listening and feeling kind of overwhelmed by all the things you want to grow from listening to Ian talking for the last however many minutes, I'm having the same feeling, so we're in it together. And we're going to make it worse with a spot of Flomo before we tie things up. And I've got so much now, Ian, thanks to you and your show and tell. But we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I've been to Dean's garden, and Flomo, if you haven't heard the term before, I'm sure you know the feeling, just seeing a plant and having FOMO about it, this fear of missing out, like that's not in my life and it needs to be. I went round Dean's garden in Somerset, sort of Devon, and there were loads of things I wanted. One of them was Lady of Shalott, which was my Flomo on our Rose special last episode. Alan very kindly gave me that for my birthday. So that's ticked off the Flomo list, and it is a beautiful rose. I'm very excited. But Dean had an aeonium called Mardi Gras, which could not be a better named aeonium, I don't think. I mean, the name just sums up the party vibe of that aeonium.
Pinks, whites, purples, maroons, they're all there.
You just want to pick it up and have a carnival with it. It's it's absolutely amazing. So
have you ordered it, Al?
I've got it.
Al ordered it. Has he got it? Oh, you've got it.
Yes, we bought it last year. It's a tiny little thing. It was quite expensive, and it came, and the head was about as big as a threepenny bit. So, so I laughed. I laughed because Graham had bought it. You see, and he said, "I bought you a new aeonium." And when we unpacked it, I laughed and I said, "Ever been had?" But it has grown. It's now about as big as a £2 coin, I think. It's obviously quite slow because of all the colours that are in it, and it goes green in the winter. And you think, "Oh, well, that was a waste of time." But then as the light levels increase, back comes the colour, and it is Mardi Gras.
Yeah, I'll send you a photo of Dean's, Alan, to make you jealous. No. It's it's quite sizable and very colourful. The other thing he had, the opposite end of the spectrum, so obviously we've got Mardi Gras kind of all singing, all dancing, geranium summer skies, a super delicate double geranium, beautiful pale lilacs, and it, even though it's not sort of overly ostentatious, it really stopped me in my tracks. It just looked like it would be a great plant to have with others, you know, a real good foil, and beautiful in its own right. And I read about it, and it seems to be a real good doer and really sort of hardy. So I might have to add that one as well.
It's a good choice, that. It's a lovely geranium, actually. And the first time I saw that was about 10 years ago. And I haven't mentioned this chap before, but Simon Gashers at the Bishop's Garden in Norwich, who is now head gardener at Summer Leighton, he was growing it in groups running through the long herbaceous borders there. And it's just lovely. I think it was flowering about sort of 2.5 feet high, and it's good, strong stems, but those wonderful double flowers, just really exquisite. A real lovely look about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's my double Flomo for this week. What would you like to bring to the Flomo party, Ian?
Well, mine isn't a particular plant, but it's a particular style of gardening. Is that okay? And it's because it's because I've been indulging in Gardens Illustrated. I've had some time to look through, and it's a really lovely feature on the Delos garden that has just been created by Dan Pearson at Sissinghurst. And I was just looking, and I was just thinking about that wonderful gravel garden style. And I was thinking about the plants like Bolota pseudodictamnus, and I was thinking about Helichrysum italicum, and I was thinking about groups of Stipa tenuissima running through, and then groups of lovely bulbs like Sternbergia luteum. It's never a style of gardening I've ever done. So eventually, when I have a bigger house and a bigger garden, I've got Flomo for this sort of wonderful sort of Mediterranean style of gardening, with all those wonderful furry textured leaves, that silver foliage, those autumn flowering bulbs. And if anybody gets a chance to look at it, this Delos garden was a creation that was originally penciled by Harold Nicholson and Vita Sackville West, I think, Alan. It was about 80 years ago they came up with the idea, didn't they? But it never got done. And having seen sort of bits about it coming to fruition, seeing it not in the flesh but in print, and I know that Joe, that works on the plant stall at Allen's, was lucky enough to go last weekend and see it in the flesh. It just looks divine in its whole sort of makeup and that lovely rich Mediterranean style. And of course it's a style that really in the east of England we can really go with well, because although we have sort of some heavy rain during the winter months, but primarily we do have very hot, long, dry springs, summers and autumns, and it really lends itself to that. So I was thinking about ways I could incorporate that somewhere, so I'm going to see if I can.
It reminds me a little bit of that quarry garden that James Basson designed at the Chelsea Flower Show, which was very controversial, because people were saying it's not, me included, I have to say, were saying it's not a garden, it's a landscape, which it was. But I mean, that is the kind of thing that this is. And I find that very exciting, because Ian, you're absolutely right. 20 inches of rain a year on the eastern side of the country, it's nothing.
So that sort of style really got me excited, really.
I can see why. And where are you with your Flomo, Alan?
Well, I've got a Flomo, don't worry. It came to me as we've been talking, and it was me that reminded myself of it, in actual fact. But I'd just like to add another little plug for another geranium blue cloud. Geranium blue cloud has bright blue flowers. I've got it planted beside the gate as you go through to the autumn border. And it's been blooming, I should think, probably for 6 weeks. It has a tight crown and it spreads beautifully. It's a wonderful geranium for underplanting roses, because it covers all their bare stems and everything else. And when the first flush goes over, which it does when you're getting towards August, cut the whole lot back, tickles a little bit of fertilizer in, give it a jolly good watering, and you may even get a few more flowers, but you'll get lovely fresh foliage. My Flomo is honeysuckle, and it is Lonicera Etrusca superba. And this is a large growing honeysuckle. It's hugely scented. It's got an award of garden merit from the Royal Horticultural Society, which means that it's tried and tested. And I don't know why I haven't got it. And I was just suddenly thinking, when I was trying to think of the name of Lonicera hildebrandiana that we talked about earlier, I kept saying Etrusca. What is Etrusca? And then it came to me and I suddenly remembered which one it was. It's a very vigorous, large growing honeysuckle. And I'm going to have it somewhere, Flomo. And I think my Flomo is going to fly up into a tree, possibly.
It sounds lovely. Sounds like a beautiful thing. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that form. So I'm going to have to look at that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I felt kind of overwhelmed by the heat before we started talking about all these plants, and now I definitely need to lie down in a darkened room. What an absolute extravaganza. Ian, you gem. Thank you for finding time to talk to us about all these wonderful, inspiring things.
It's been lovely. It's great being with you as always. Really enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Come back again sooner next time.
All right. Take care, you lot.
Bye. Happy gardening.
Bye.
Bye. Just going to do my hair.
I see a light up there. It's like a UFO in the corner of your picture.
Yeah.
Graham and I were just talking, whether we'll ever do it or not, I don't know, but I'd quite like to do something with golden catalpas.
Oh my God, no. Are you serious?
Yes.
Jeez. Do you know
Why?
what? I was at Mum and Dad's picking some for this thing earlier, and I thought, do you know what? I thought it'd be really lovely if I had the space to plant an avenue of golden catalpas and then coppice them, pollard them back every spring. I'm serious about this. I did. You remember I did. Yeah, look at it. Isn't it sexy?